Okay, let's see if we are recording. We are recording. Okay, so I wanted to go over basic shapes with you guys and kind of give you a better detail of how to do things. So here we have kind of a complicated image of a dog. It's hard today. So I'm going to go over how to how to use basic shapes to create that image. So our basic shapes are circles, triangles, and rectangles or squares. Now this can be any form of these things. It doesn't just have to be like the traditional triangle and square and rectangle. For example, you might have a triangle like this, but you might also have a triangle like that, right? Really thin and narrow. On this dog, what we're looking for is those basic shapes. So, for example, let's move this layer above this one. For those of you who will be using Adobe, this is the Adobe Sketch. It's meant for mobile devices. So if you have a phone or anything you want to draw on, you can actually use Adobe Sketch. If you have an iPad, you can use Adobe Fresco, which also allows you to paint. So if we look here on the leash, we actually have a rectangle, right? And we have a rectangle here as well. But then to get the more complicated part of the leash, we're kind of getting into triangle territory here. We have this kind of loopy triangle here, another rectangle here, triangle, triangle, rectangle, and then we have our leash shape. So the leash isn't the main focus of this, obviously. The main focus is going to be the dog. But I wanted you to see that even complicated shapes like this can be broken down into those basic shapes. So let's go ahead and hide this layer. If I can figure out, yeah, there we go. Okay, now we're gonna work on the basic shapes of the dog. We wanna break apart the dog into areas where the dog would naturally bend. So we have the jaw, right? That's going to open and close. We have a neck that's going to bend. We have arms and legs and all that bend at joints. So we want to separate each shape by the joint areas. For example, the ears bend and wiggle separate from the head. Those are two separate areas. So we want to make sure that we are breaking apart these shapes based upon the areas that move. So for example, if we look at the rib cage of the dog, kind of have this giant squarish shape. It's a pentagon. Okay. Now my brain is going to tell me that this dog's cage, rib cage, is actually this shape, because I know that a dog's rib cage from the side is this shape. But this is the left side of your brain, and what we want to focus on is the right side. And that side is going to focus on what it sees, not what it knows. So we don't want this guy. We want to make sure we're drawing what we see, not what we know. Then we're going to break down the neck shape. So neck shape is kind of a trapezoid shape. The ears, diamonds, right? We have this oval for the nose because it's a boop-worthy nose. I see a trapezoid for the front of the snout, and then kind of a rectangle for the side. If you want to do a shape of those all together instead of break them down into tiny pieces, the shape I would see is kind of like that. Then I see kind of an oval for the mouth, oval for the eyes, and an oval for the head. Now this is looking kind of creepy right now, but you got to trust me and stay with me. Now we have the legs that we're breaking down. That's the joint that bends. I see rectangles. And then when we get into the paws, I'm not going to worry about breaking down each individual paw, right? Because if we worry about breaking down, or not, obviously I want to break down each individual paw, each individual being of the paw. I don't know what the technical term is, but I'm just going to go for the basic shape. So thus far we've had rectangles, circles, and more rectangles or cut off triangles. So if you cut off the top of a triangle. It's called a trapezoid, in case you aren't in geometry yet. I see the hip bone, and then on top of the hip bone, we have the front of the dog leg. So if you were to look at it sideways, you would have something like this, right? So we have our front oval and our back oval, but because of the way that we're angled, it looks like that. So then we have our front foot. We have the hips. Now it's starting to get visually confusing, but you're gonna have to stay with me. Okay, we have all our basic shapes. Now let's switch to drawing with a little bit more. Okay, so I have all my basic shapes, and now I'm gonna use this to create the outside. So the first step, let me, oh, come on, brain. Doesn't know, oh, there's the eraser, okay. The first step is going to be identifying what we need to do in order to make this work. So let's do this. Okay, so the first step was getting our shapes. The second step will be checking those shapes. Third step will be outlining. And then we'll check our outline. Then we'll erase, which with digital is very easy. But if you're doing pencil and paper, you'll obviously have to slow down. And then after we erase, that's when we put our detail. The number one mistake people make when drawing is they like to skip to this, and they'll start drawing the eye of the dog. And even if they're really good at drawing, they'll draw the eye of the dog, and they'll start putting all this detail in the eye of the dog. And then they'll realize once they have the eye of the dog, they'll draw their nose. Oh wait, my nose is too small for that eye. Okay, well now I have to erase the eye. Okay, I'm gonna go all the way back to erase the nose or the eye and start over. If you've done this, which I'm sure almost every single one of you has, then this system is how you avoid that issue. So you're gonna have to trust me a little bit. We've done the shapes. We checked our shapes by putting it on top of the image. When you guys are drawing, we won't put it on top of the image. Now we're going to outline. So let's go ahead and start doing our outline. This is what you would traditionally consider drawing. Okay. Okay. So I have the basic outline there. That's actually detail. I skipped steps. I'm sorry. I got in my zone. Okay, let's do their outline. Let's do the outline of the nose shape. I'm following the shape I drew. So let's actually get rid of this layer so that you can see what it would look like. Okay, we have our basic shapes. I'm gonna open, I'm sorry. Okay. Now we're going to have our dog ear that would go around the outline of our mouth, nose, the boopable nose. Eyes, we know they're in there. We don't need to worry about detail yet. We're just getting the outline. Because we have our basic shapes, we can get our outline really decently accurate. If you need to pause because you're at the follow along stage, free to do so. You do not have to move this fast. Okay, so we have our basic outline of the dog. I'm going to hide this layer so that this would be the erasing step. Let's hide. So we have our basic information. As you can see, it's pretty accurate to the dog. Okay, so now we want to go to the next stage, which is that detail stage, right? So we have our dog, we have our basic shapes. We got to check those shapes. So for example, my nose is really small. We actually need to increase the size of that nose. I'm just copying the shapes I see, which the shapes I saw was like circle, circle with this bigger circle around it. So I colored the outside of that bigger circle. And that kind of gave me the dog nose shape. Then we have the detail of the lip. I'm going through, I'm going to curve this out a bit. I'm starting to get the inside of the dog eye. It's basically a full circle, although he looks very worried. Okay, got a tooth. I could also add in this leash if I want to put it back in because we have our basic shapes, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. If we look right here on the dog neck, we have these folds. So this is where I'm starting to get into those detail stages. This again is where most people make the mistake of starting here. It's like building a person without putting a skeleton in them. It's not going to turn out good. They're going to be a little bit floppy and details are going to not come through very well. Okay, let's see. He has these shoulder, actually probably needs to go a little bit farther out and add some detail in here. Sorry about the bell. Still in the classroom. Okay, I'm gonna take a break. Okay. Yes. Do you need paper and pencil? Okay. Sweet. Okay, if we look on the dog, I made a mistake here. This part of the dog is in front of the back leg, and this part doesn't work, so I can erase that. Get that muscle of that back leg, and then we do have this right here. Now, part of this is learning how to look at the image. Okay, change that shape a bit. My shape wasn't very good. Part of it is also just practice. Okay, thanks for stopping in. So as you can see, this is actually a really decent sketch. We have our details and we can keep going. We can add color if we wanted to and all that stuff. But for right now, this is the stage we want to get, oh, sorry, skip. This is the stage we want to get to. And in order to get to that stage, we need to be using these steps. So, shapes. Oh, you guys, I'm still learning how to do this, sorry. We want to make sure we're doing our shapes, that we check our shapes, and then once we've checked our shapes, that we are actually, sorry. So we have our shapes, then we check our shapes, then we're just doing a basic outline. So remember I made that mistake and I started doing like really detailed information on the eye, and we didn't need that, right? So we want the outline because the outline allows us to make those mistakes, like recognizing that the butt wasn't far enough out or that my foot shape was wrong before we get to this stage. This should always be the last stage, so that's where I started putting fur on the dog. That's where I start identifying if I want to shade or color things, right? We don't need this detail until after all that other stuff, because if we don't have the skeleton set up, it's just going to be a nightmare. Hopefully this helped.